Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge, and welcome to Keeping Relevant. The United States incarcerates more people than any other country in the world. And although the number of those in prison is lower than it recently was, the number of older persons over the age of 55 has increased. That's what I want to talk about today. And I could not find a better partner to do that with than Jose Saldaña, the director of the organization Release Aging People in Prison. Welcome.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Great to be with you again.
People who had this experience firsthand of being incarcerated originally formed this organization.
Exactly.
And you also have had the first-hand experience of being incarcerated.
Yes.
Which I think you should tell us briefly about, because maybe it will just touch people a little bit more if they understand what happened.
Yes. Well, I was incarcerated for 38 years.
38.
I was released 5 years ago after 38 years of incarceration. I've seen the crisis of people aging in prison. I experienced it myself. Long-term prison sentences with little or no opportunity for release at the back end. In between, you have men and women in our prison system just getting old, sick, and unfortunately, in too many cases, dying at a very young age of 58 years old.
That's the average age?
That's the average age of death for older incarcerated men and women.
How old were you when you were convicted?
28 years old. I haven't reached 28 yet. I was a few months shy of 28 years old.
And you were in for how long?
38 years.
Did you have any hope of ever getting out?
There was a point where I started losing hope. I started seeing people that I came up with in the prison system dying at 57, 58, 60. And you know, these were relatively healthy looking men. And I had to wonder whether I would be next.
Yeah. And how long, what was your sentence?
25 years to life.
To life, so the open-ended thing. So you'd start to go to the parole board?
After 25 years, you appear, once you reach your minimum set by the court granted you a minimum that you should be eligible for release at that term.
And you look forward to that.
And we look forward to that, but you know, as you've seen everybody else being denied,
yeah.
You know, you knew that.
Oh, you had that.
I mean, the family, you know, people who really think that the system is really fair, they have more hope than we do. Although I try not to lose hope.
Yeah.
But you know, we have expectations that, you know, if we do everything right, and we've done, a lot of us, myself included, we got college degrees. I was a part of a small group of men who created the most effective therapeutic programs to help us change our thinking, change our behavior, and you know, adapt life-affirming virtues and values. So we expect that will have some value when we appear before the parole board.
Had you graduated from high school?
I had a high school diploma when I entered prison. I had no college, but I accumulated.
So you
college
went
degree.
to college?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, and you got a degree?
Of course. Yes.
And then what else did you do?
I spent a lot of my time doing litigation around prison reform, you know, trying to address the brutality of the prison system. I also spent some time in trying to create programs that will help us, you know, become better human beings. The Department of Corrections, this may surprise our listeners, the Department of Corrections does not offer a single program, not a single program to help us develop insight into the harm that we cause. We develop these programs because, you know, we have hopes of returning back to our communities. Yeah. And we know the condition our communities is in, and we want to be a part of the solution. So this is why we develop these programs. So if we're given the opportunity, we can be a part of the solution.
So if you have all this time, you spend a lot of time thinking, I would guess, how
Absolutely.
You got into this, what
Right.
you did. Yeah. And then you go to the parole board, and what happens?
And the only thing they are concerned about is the nature of the crime that was committed decades ago.
So that's the famous first question.
That's the first and sometimes the only question.
Tell me about your crime, right?
I was convicted for attempted murder of a New York City police officer.
Oh, God.
I was involved in criminal activity. I was involved in an accident with a gypsy cab, and I was armed with an illegal weapon. So I offered the gypsy cab driver some money to, it was an accident, unintentional, to repair the car, and let things, so he didn't want the money. Instead, they called the cops.
Oh.
So this is how I got involved, and the cops came out.
And you had a gun.
Guns blazing. I had a gun. But their version of the story is that we shot first. Yeah. But they already knew we was armed, so they came out guns blazing, and in the exchange of fire, unfortunately, one of the police officers got shot in the face and lost vision. Huh. And was permanently, injured as a result of that.
So it got to be a much bigger thing than it was intended to be.
It was an attempted murder. Yeah. And listen, this is it's very sad about it. It shouldn't have happened. I should have surrendered. I should have surrendered, but I really wasn't given a chance to surrender. But I should have just accepted whatever penalties came my way as a result of that, because I was thinking like a criminal. But that was then.
Yeah. And there you were, sitting in a prison. So you got denied.
I kept getting denied parole because of the nature of the crime.
So you have to wait 2 years after you're denied.
2 years after every denial.
Then you go again.
Then you go again,
and you get denied.
And again. And unfortunately, I had the misfortune of having former law enforcement actually conduct the hearing. So that there kind of slighted the hearing.
That was the parole board member.
The parole commissioners who were retired law enforcement, and now they are entrusted with the task of deciding who should be released and who shouldn't be released.
That's not a very good thing, is it?
It's not a very good thing.
So you were denied how many times?
I was denied 4 times. And on the 5th, and you may very well know the parole commissioner who granted me parole. Her name is Carol Shapiro.
Oh, I remember her very well. You were lucky. You got one of the parole commissioners who really...
And she had a social service background.
Yes. She was more thoughtful about it.
More thoughtful about it.
More understanding of what was going on.
And asked me one question about the crimes that I committed in 1979. And then she said, let's talk about what you've done the last 38 years.
That's amazing. And then she retired.
And unfortunately...
She left.
She was forced out.
So you got out, and Fareed was looking for a successor.
Well, not actually. Fareed was sick at the time.
Yeah, he was one of the 3 people.
Kathy Boudin and Laura Whitehorn were the 3. And Sophia Elijah, she was also involved in the formulation of the RAPP campaign. Fareed, an African-American man who had a passion for justice.
Yeah.
He was sick.
Yeah.
And before he, just hours before he passed away, he named me as his successor.
That's interesting. So now, you are now the advocate for how many people?
Well, we have roughly 6,000 or 7,000 elderly people in our
How many?
6,000 to 7,000
People
elderly
who are
people.
over 55.
Over 55. They're elderly people in our system. A lot of them are serving long-term prison sentences. And sadly, I already know too many who have passed away. And there is absolutely no rationale for keeping someone. We have people up to 80 years old, 85 years old, having parole hearings in a terminally ill medical unit. A parole hearing at a terminally ill medical parole
and they're not being released.
Not being released.
So they could die with their families.
They die. They needlessly die in prison.
Yeah. It's the indeterminate sentences when it's 15 years to life.
Right. That's when the parole board.
Years to
that's
life.
When the parole board kicks in, and that's the only way you're going to be released.
So, but there are some other. Yeah. But sometimes you can get it's not a pardon.
It's a clemency.
Approved by the governor
Right.
if you're serving a long time and you haven't reached the minimum, right?
Right.
And they will give you the ability to go before a parole board even though you haven't
Right.
served the minimum.
Rarely done, but
Yeah,
it's
very
it's,
rarely done. Very difficult to get.
and it's seldom done on the basis of age.
Right.
Like what they call a medical parole. I know people who have been granted medical parole, but then go into the bureaucracy of first having to go before the parole board,
Right.
and then having to get somewhere to live.
Right.
While that's going on, the person dies.
I know somebody who's gotten the medical thing but gets rejected by the parole board.
And that happens also.
It's just an incredible kind of thing. So RAPP is helping approximately how many? 7?
We don't only advocate for the elderly
Yeah.
that are in our prison. We
Right.
advocate to reform the entire system.
No, yeah.
You know, everyone that is parole eligible, we're talking about a quarter of the population are going before the parole board. We advocate that they get a fair hearing.
And so you also object to the way the parole board is formed and who serves on it.
We've been involved in that process. You know, the governor appoints parole commissioners. He appoints them either to finish a parole commissioner's term who retired or left the board or whatever way, or he appoints them for 6-year terms. But when he appoints new commissioners, whether it's to complete a term or for his own term or her term, those commissioners have to be confirmed by the New York State Senate. And this is where we have become active
Yeah.
in educating the senators and who these appointees are and how they will damage families, really devastate families because they are already oriented toward punishment as opposed to valuing rehabilitation and transformation.
And at the same time, you have to work against the prevailing feeling that people are projecting that crime is being increased or that reforms have caused more crimes.
We have to counter the falsehood that the media puts out, as well as law enforcement. They think that they should be involved in that process, that they're entitled to tell the board as well as the governor that certain people should never get out of prison.
And including in those people are the DAs in the county where
Absolutely.
the police, the PBA, I guess it is, right? And the victims' families.
The victims, some victims, and we actually have support from the largest victims of sexual violence and interpersonal violence in New York State.
Do you really?
We have their support. They understand one thing, not all victims are the same, but the victims that we are able to communicate, ongoing discussions sometimes for years, they understand that keeping a person in prison until they die or near death does not help them. Does not help them heal from the trauma that they suffer for years.
Now, what is the name? I always get it mixed up. Of meeting with the victims of your crime. What do you call that process?
It's a reconciliation process.
Reconciliation. So does that help?
It helps. It helps because this is a sad point. Racist policies of mass incarceration has impacted particular communities.
We didn't mention the race. Right?
Black and brown communities.
Yes.
That's just a fact.
Total fact.
Mass incarceration is real.
Right.
The policies were real. They devastated tens and thousands of families in our communities.
Unbelievable.
Unfortunately, interpersonal violence is also real in our communities. That's just a fact. So you have a mother who lost her son to gun violence, but has another son serving a life sentence.
Another son.
Another son serving a life sentence.
Yeah.
Or a husband serving a life, or a brother serving a life sentence. This is just the reality, So in our communities, people are more forgiving, more understanding. They see the system is not really working for anybody. Nobody's helping the mother heal from that trauma.
No. And what's the number of 1 out of every 5 or 6 young African Americans has somebody incarcerated?
It's really more.
Yeah.
It's really a lot. It's a lot closer to 1 out of 4 have
Yeah.
someone incarcerated.
Yeah.
And usually that incarceration is for long-term.
And it's
long-term
amazing.
sentences.
That means the children, the parents, the spouses, the whole family. I mean, it just,
I know from my own experience. When I was arrested, I had 4 children.
you had 4 children.
4 children, ages 1 to 8. It devastated them. I mean, I didn't understand how far it went, how deep it went.
Yeah.
To have a child, just one day, dad is no longer there. Mom is no longer there. They live with, and today, ACE, what they call adverse childhood experience, is recognized by child psychologists.
Did you see any of your children while you were
Yes,
incarcerated?
yes. I saw, and it was hard to see the harm. It was hard to see the trauma that they was living with inside until they started opening up. And I tell you, and this is something that is devastating to hear that teenagers, when they grew up, approaching their teenage years, they started talking to themselves among what they all went through in their own individual way. And my 4 children made a pact that they will never have children for fear that their children may go through what they went through. That is just devastating. And that's how deep it goes.
And they never did?
And, well, 2 of them had one
Okay.
apiece. 2 didn't. But this wasn't recognized. People was talking about, why are these kids, just children, acting up the way they do?
Yeah.
Now they understand.
Right.
that-
And
that-
there are some
and
good
there
programs.
There are some good programs that are addressing it,
Right.
but still some are not willing to talk about it.
Right. Right. But your own children stayed out of legal trouble?
One of my sons was arrested. The oldest son was arrested, and he should have never been arrested. He should have never been arrested. It was, he was 17 years old. It was 3 of them.
17.
3 of them, they was arguing about a girl, young girl, arguing about a young girl, and they were his cousins. So the aunt tells them, y'all take that outside. They took it outside, and one of the guys who was also the girl's boyfriend hit the guy with a baseball bat, floored him. My son had a knife at his waist.
Huh.
He never took it out.
Yeah.
The witnesses say he never took it out. The other guy grabbed the knife from him and stabbed him, but yet my son was charged with murder because he would not cooperate and tell on his cousin. So he spent nearly 5 years in Rikers Island before he's finally acquitted.
Oh my God, that's a whole nother problem.
He was finally acquitted on Rikers Island.
Could he make
5
the
years.
bail? Was he on bail?
He couldn't make the
So that's one of the problems now.
And you asked me, could he make the bail? This is another problem that's really invisible to most people.
Right.
When you take dad, mom, grandma, granddad out the family and you put them in prison for long term, the family lives in perpetual poverty for decades. The family lives in, we're already a poor community. We're already poor families, but now it doubles that poverty. But now, and listen to this, when we are released, we uplift the family out of that perpetual poverty. What purpose it serves to keep us in prison?
It doubles the cost. Because how much does it cost to keep somebody in prison for a year? What, $80,000?
More. For an elder person, it's closer to $200,000 a year. For an elder person, it's closer to $200,000 a year. Why would we keep somebody in prison like that?
And another important factor is people don't commit another crime.
They kept saying I was a threat to public safety. I haven't been a threat to public safety for a single second.
Since you were
in the 5 years
arrested.
that I've been out. In fact, I enhanced public safety. I'm in our communities dealing with these lost kids.
That's
People, society doesn't really care about them. They neglect them until they're arrested, and they give them too much attention. But we are the ones. Credible messenger, that concept, we created that.
Yeah.
No university.
Yeah.
We create violence interrupters. We created that. And we are the best credible messengers.
So why do we have this? Is it that people have no empathy, or people are vindictive, or it helps the profession? I mean, why are we perpetuating this?
Well, sadly, prisons has become a very prosperous industry.
And a popular political issue.
And it is for those on the other side of the aisle, for those who define justice as perpetual punishment. We just can't go on. If we define justice as perpetual punishment, then there's a reason why we incarcerate more men and women than anybody else on the planet, because other people do not define justice in this way. We have to get away from punishing people. The only solution to interpersonal harm, to any type of harm, is perpetual punishment. We got to get away from that. And we believe that we have a solution toward that path.
So what's the solution?
The solution is to create legislation that will give people in our prison system a meaningful opportunity for release. Everyone should have a meaningful opportunity for release. If we are the best credible messengers to reach our youth, which everybody has to admit, the school system and everybody else has failed them. Everybody else has failed them. Just look at it like this. If somebody like me, who was a violent person, can be transformed, I didn't do it by myself. I didn't do it in a vacuum. If I can become the best human being that I can become in prison, being guided by elder people in the prison system, and who have guided an entire generation, if we can do it in the worst conditions possible, we can do it in more favorable conditions. That's our communities.
So how are you proposing? What's on the table?
Give the elder parole and the fair and timely parole bills, the two bills that will give people this fair opportunity to prove their worth as human beings. Appear before everyone should have the opportunity for release. The elder parole bill says that if you're 55 years old and have served 15 years, it doesn't matter what the judge sentenced you to. It doesn't matter what the DA says, recommendation. You should be able to appear before a parole board for release consideration.
Okay, that's one.
That's one. The other one is the fair and timely parole bill. The fair and timely parole bill will stop the parole board from denying parole for years and sometimes decades for the one thing no one can change, the crime that was committed. It requires them to evaluate this person's readiness to come back to the community based on who he is or she is today, what they've done. You can't ignore years and years of what people have done to change their lives. To value that transformation and make a decision based on that transformation. These two bills, and to have a parole board that is fair and just, not dominated by law enforcement. There should be psychologists there, teachers, nurses, even doctors, psychologists, everyone who understands human behavior, as opposed to people who like to punish.
It's so sensible.
It sounds reasonable to me. It sounds reasonable to you.
And should the parole board be able to get a letter from the DA, for instance?
We believe, and this is something that I personally really believe, that when you seek advice and guidance from people who have been harmed, never been given the opportunity to heal, they're going to continue to see. They don't see me as an old man. They see me as a young Afro guy that committed a horrible crime. So they're going to always say, let him rot. Let him rot. These letters that they encourage are for punishment. They're not for determining a person's readiness. Right. They're just for punishment.
So what can people do?
Support the Release Aging People in Prison campaign. We have something that has proven to work. We are evidence that what we've done in prison works. And if it's able to work in prison, it can work in our society, in our streets that urgently need it. We don't have enough men and women in our community.
Do you urge people to write to the state legislature and elected officials?
Write to all. Get to know who your state legislator is. Get to know who your assembly member is. write to them, tell them you support elder parole, you support Fan County Parole,
And the governor.
you want them to support it, and write to the governor also. Tell them you support these legislators' initiatives, you believe in them, and they should believe in them. And if they do not want to support this, when you know it's the right thing, then we have to vote them out.
Okay, that sounds very good. I don't want to see you depressed. I want to see you full of, I know that you had a major rally at the first day of the state legislature. And
we just had a beautiful rally. We had a band, a marching band.
Yeah.
You know, we went up there. We made a lot of noise. We spoke to a lot of legislators, and you know, we don't want to hear that this is an election year.
Right.
This is another year that someone in our prison system is going to die. Matter of fact, a lot of people in our prison system is going to die this year if we fail to pass these two bills.
Yeah. Well, Jose, I just hope that you have that spirit and a soul, and I wish more people had it. But I hope they do support you. And if after looking at your website and really studying the organization, they should all support you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much,
Thank
and
you.
we love you also. You know, there aren't too many people. No, there aren't too many people in the media that's actually supporting this.
That's true. That's true. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.